Hey there, friend. Tonight, let's travel not to the grand marble halls of Caesar's palace or the roaring sands of the Colosseum, but somewhere far more ordinary, somewhere sleepier, more forgettable. Welcome to your new home in ancient Rome, a modest, slightly crumbling insula on the quieter side of town. No statues here, just stairs, dust, and the occasional lizard. Now I want you to lie back, close your eyes, if you feel like it, and let your imagination do just enough work to feel sleepy. Picture it, a small, dark room, tucked several stories up in a multi-family building that leans a little more each year, not out of design, but out of gentle neglect. You wake up, not because you want to, but because the baby in the unit below has been crying since sunrise, or possibly before sunrise. Time is vague here. The roosters are confused, the dogs indifferent, and the humans resigned. You blink through the smoky light, filtering in through a hole in the wall. A hole that generously calls itself a window, but functions mostly as a smoke delivery system and occasional bird tunnel. Your mattress is made of straw. Not metaphorically, it's literal straw. Some pieces still have that earthy farm smell. Others have hosted entire insect civilizations. You don't want to think about which pieces are which, so you just accept it. You scratch absent-mindedly and pull your one blanket around your shoulders. It smells like wool mildew and memories you don't want to revisit. The walls around you are stone rough, undecorated, and slightly damp. They sweat when it's hot and shiver when it's cold, which is a real feat, considering they're not supposed to do either. You've got no art on the walls, unless you count the mystery stain that's starting to resemble the goddess Minerva if you squint sideways and have a vivid imagination. There's a jug of water near the bed, or what used to be water. Now it's more of a suggestion. Murky room temperature, and hosting a few uninvited guests. But you drink it anyway, because hydration is important, even if the flavor profile is slightly mossy, with a hint of pigeon. Now about the chamber pot. It sits patiently in the corner, always watching, always waiting. It's not glamorous, but it's reliable, which is more than you can say about most of your neighbors. You used it during the night, because of course you did, and now it's your job to carry it down 4 flights of increasingly narrow, increasingly tilted stairs. Try not to spill. There's a lot of shame in that kind of spill, the kind that echoes for generations. The building itself, the insula, is a marvel of ancient urban planning. If your definition of marvel includes fire hazards and walls thin enough to hear your neighbor's dreams. constructed from concrete wood, and hope it sways ever so slightly with the wind. And when someone above you spills their chamber pot, which they will, you get a sudden lesson in ancient Roman plumbing, gravity and regret. Outside your door, the hallway is dark, always dark. They haven't invented hallway lighting, and candles cost money you don't have. You shuffle toward the stairs, nudging aside a rat who seems more surprised to see you than you are to see him. You apologize politely. He nods. You've known each other for months now. The stairs creak underfoot, not because they're wooden, but because they're tired. They've held up generations of tenants, chamber pots, and accidental goats. You descend slowly, careful not to step on the loose tile on the second landing. It doesn't go anywhere, just wobbles ominously like it wants attention. As you step outside, finally free from the gentle dampness of your room, you're greeted by the warm, comforting scent of morning in ancient Rome. It's a layered smell. Top notes of baked bread and roasting olives, base notes of sewage, unwashed humanity, and something you can't quite name, but sincerely hope isn't what you think it is. The street is alive already. Vendors are shouting. Chickens are everywhere. Someone's already arguing about cabbage. And above all of it, the sun is climbing lazily into the sky, casting a dusty golden light on the chipped stone facades of buildings that have seen more life than they'd care to remember. And here you are, tunic slightly askew, hair stubbornly flat on one side, eyes still adjusting to the light. Another day begins in the Roman Empire, and despite the odds, you're still standing. Well, mostly upright. But don't get too excited. There are 19 more stages to go, and the sponge on a stick is still waiting for you. So there you are, on the sun-dusted streets of ancient Rome, standing with one foot in the gutter, and the other firmly planted in what might once have been something alive. You haven't had breakfast. You haven't had a wash. But already, nature insists on asserting its dominance. The chamber pot is full, your bladder is full, and your options are decidedly not. You start the slow shuffle toward the nearest latrina, which you've visited just enough times to know you won't enjoy. Rome, for all its architectural wonders and aqueducts, did not spend much energy on bathroom charm. As you navigate through the cluttered side alleys, past the vendor hawking slightly sad olives, and the man loudly reciting poetry to a cat, you eventually find the unmistakable sign of a public toilet. Not a sign in the modern sense, of course, but a lingering olfactory warning, and a stone bench worn by generations of reluctant sitters. The latrina is open to the elements, and unfortunately also open to the public in every possible sense. You step inside, or rather into, and are immediately met with the familiar whiff of damp stone, old vinegar, and collective human resignation. There's no door. There are no partitions. Just a long, continuous slab with regularly spaced holes carved into it, positioned over a shallow drainage channel that gurgles faintly, as if protesting its own existence. You glance at the occupants. 3 men are already there. One is humming. Another is eating olives with suspicious confidence. The third nods at you in greeting, as though you're old friends reunited in a place of shared humility. You nod back with the solemnity the moment demands. You select a spot not too close, but not so far away that you seem antisocial. You sit if sit is the right word for the way one hovers cautiously over ancient stone and tries not to think too hard about temperature or texture. There's a slight breeze. It's not refreshing. Now comes the moment you've been dreading. The Tersorium. It sounds like the name of a forgotten constellation, but it's much more grounded in reality. A communal sponge on a stick kept in a jar of vinegar that's supposed to purify it, but instead mostly just marinates it. It leans there, slumped in a way that suggests it has seen too much and retains every memory. You watch a man rinse it. You watch another man use it. You consider your options. There are not many. If you were wealthy, you might have brought your own cloth. But you are not. So you do what generations before you have done. You embrace the reality of communal hygiene and try not to make eye contact with anyone, least of all the sponge. Afterward, you rinse it, as custom dictates, though no one really knows if that helps. You place it back in the jar like a reluctant offering. You exhale. You are changed. Someone beside you begins discussing grain prices. Someone else laughs at a joke you didn't hear. A child runs past the latrina entrance, yelling about figs. Life, as always, goes on. You stand up, feeling lighter, but not quite triumphant. You exit slowly, with the gait of someone who has endured a quiet ordeal. Outside, the world is still spinning its Roman rhythm. A man is trying to sell you sandals. A woman is arguing about the price of vinegar. Somewhere a dog barks with the conviction of a philosopher. You begin walking back toward your apartment, but pause halfway. You realize you still haven't eaten. And the day is young. Too young, perhaps. Your stomach growls in protest, a reminder that despite your many indignities, you are still ruled by the same needs as every citizen of this empire. You turn instead toward the nearby Popina, a small Roman eatery that promises warm bread, questionable wine, and something loosely described as stew. The air around it smells of garum, the fermented fish sauce beloved by those with strong stomachs and no sense of smell. You know you'll be eating there because the alternative is hunger. And hunger, like the sponge, is persistent. You step toward it, thinking only vaguely about what mystery meat might await, when suddenly the man beside you sneezes so powerfully that you instinctively bless him in 3 languages. He thanks you, then offers you a fig, which you politely decline. You press on, weaving through the crowd. A donkey blocks your path. You apologize to it. It ignores you. You consider going back upstairs to your room, but the idea of climbing 4 flights without having eaten first is laughable. So you keep walking, 1 foot in front of the other, pulled by the scent of overcooked lentils and the weary hope that the stew today might contain something identifiable. The popina door creaks open, and you enter into a space filled with steam noise and the unmistakable scent of burnt onions. You've made it this far. The morning may be behind you, but the day itself, oh, the day is just getting started. You step into the popina like a man entering a fog bank made of soup smoke and mildly threatening bread. The ceiling is low enough to insult your posture, and the air hums with the combined exhalations of stew, sweat, and stories told too often. There's no welcome bell, no host to greet you, just a tired-looking man behind a counter who's been wiping the same spot for 10 years, and a cat that may or may not be part owner. The floor is sticky, the walls stained, and the patrons thoroughly disinterested in your arrival, which is in its own way comforting. You're not here to be seen. You're here to eat something solid enough to chew, but soft enough not to fight back. You find an empty stool, more or less empty, depending on how you define crumbs, grease, and suspicious moisture, and claim it with the weary finality of someone who's already lived several lifetimes this morning. The man behind the counter glances at you, gestures vaguely toward the pot, and returns to his cloth. You nod, which is popina code for "I'll take whatever, won't kill me." Moments later, a cracked clay bowl is slid your way, filled with something grayish-brown and steaming with a texture somewhere between porridge and regret. It smells of lentils, garlic, and something aquatic that may have once been a fish, or simply swam near one. You pick up the spoon, provided a piece of wood so worn it could tell stories, and begin to eat. The first bite is hot, too hot. It scalds your mouth with the kind of heat that sticks around not to punish, but to remind you who's in charge. The flavor is humble, earthy, a bit like dirt, if dirt had gone on a spiritual journey through a spice rack and returned with only bay leaf and disappointment. But it's warm, and warm counts for a lot. As you eat, the sounds of the popina swirl around you, spoons clinking feet, shuffling, voices rising and falling in the kind of low drama that only breakfast can fuel. A man to your left argues with himself about debt. To your right, someone is asleep, against the table, snoring gently into a bowl of barley mash. The cat has migrated to your feet, curling around your leg, like a furry tax collector, hoping for a donation of scraps or sympathy. You drop a bit of crust for it. It sniffs, considers, then walks away without comment. Typical. The stew improves slightly with each bite, either because it's cooling or because your standards are rapidly lowering. You find a piece of something chewy, perhaps meat, perhaps overconfident mushroom, and decide not to ask questions. A man walks past your table and knocks a jug of wine into your bowl. The stew is now fortified. He apologizes with a shrug and keeps walking. You stir it once for form's sake and continue eating. Your stomach, grateful for the attention, begins to settle. You feel marginally more human. The bowl empties slowly, the spoon scraping gently, as if carving your name into the morning. When you're done, you slide the bowl away and place a small coin on the table, just enough to be respectful, not enough to be remembered. The man behind the counter doesn't look up, but the cat does. It blinks at you like a disapproving ant. Outside, the sun is higher now, casting harsh lines across the cobbled street. The day is warming, not in a cheerful way, but in the way of stone heating underfoot, making everything vaguely uncomfortable and slightly more smelly. You step out of the popina with a full stomach and a renewed awareness that your tunic clings where it shouldn't. You breathe in deep, which is a mistake. The smell of the city hits you like a damp sandal to the face market, refuse horse droppings, last night's wine revisiting the gutter. You cough lightly and push forward. The street is busier now. Merchants bark from stalls. Children chase pigeons with dreams of glory. A man loudly sells something he calls imported wool, which looks suspiciously like someone's old toga, repurposed as a towel. You know you should go back upstairs, perhaps tidy your space. But there's nothing up there except heat mildew and a neighbor who likes to practice the lute poorly and often. So instead, you follow the sound of the crowd meandering toward the marketplace. Your feet move instinctively, dodging puddles and shadows, weaving between carts and conversation. A man selling pickled garlic offers you a free sample. You take it because saying no requires energy you no longer possess. It's sharp, oily, and wakes up parts of your mouth that thought they'd retired. You thank him with a grunt and keep walking. You pass a woman balancing a basket of figs, a boy selling wax tablets with suggestive doodles already carved in, and a goat that seems to be judging your posture. You nod at the goat. It blinks slowly. In the middle of the forum, a small crowd has gathered, not for a speech or a sacrifice, nothing so formal. Just a man juggling amphorae while shouting about the merits of his cousin's new fish sauce. It draws a few laughs, mostly because one of the amphorae leaks in a very amusing direction. You pause just long enough to admire the absurdity, then keep moving, drawn not by purpose, but by momentum. The day is settling into its rhythm. The air is thick, the sun insistent, and your next task, whatever it may be, still quietly forming in the distance. You glance toward the bathhouse, then toward the bakery, then toward a group of laborers hauling bricks toward a construction site. Somewhere between all those options, your afternoon awaits. You drift toward the construction site without exactly deciding to feet carrying you on a path worn by routine, and the subtle peer pressure of other bodies moving in the same direction. The clatter of stone, the barked commands, and the sharp scrape of wood against stone grow louder with each step, filling the gaps between your thoughts with the familiar rhythm of labor. Rome is always building something, you think vaguely. A temple, a bath, another wall, to replace the one the last rainstorm politely dissolved. As you approach a man with arms like marble columns and a forehead permanently furrowed by both effort and sunlight points at you. You, tunica, with the garlic breath. We're short-handed today. You pause, looking over your shoulder, to see if there's another tunica with breath that sings of fermented cloves and regret. There isn't. Congratulations, you're hired. Or perhaps conscripted. In Rome, the line between the two is blurry, especially when you're within yelling distance of someone with a clipboard and no sense of irony. They hand you a wooden bucket already half full of mortar and point toward a stack of bricks that look like they've been waiting for you specifically. You sigh internally and trudge over, noting the sticky way your sandals grip the warm earth. The bricks are heavier than you remember, though that could be because you've never actually lifted one before. You try not to show it. The others are watching not out of curiosity, but out of boredom, work is dull. Watching someone else suffer through it is slightly less dull. You bend your knees, just like the man with the lopsided beard advised, and lift. It goes poorly. You don't drop the brick, which is a small victory, but your face turns a shade of red that might concern the average physician. Fortunately, there are no physicians here. Only men who nod silently at your effort and return to their own rhythm of lift, stack, smear, repeat. The mortar smells like wet bread and limestone. The sun is higher now, baking the back of your neck with slow, deliberate cruelty. Sweat forms under your tunic and trickles in places you hadn't known were capable of perspiration. You place your first brick. It sits slightly crooked. You press it down, adjust it, then step back and admire your work with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has contributed, however slightly, to something larger than themselves. Then someone moves it. No comment, no eye contact, just a silent correction, smoother and faster than your attempt. And just like that, your tiny brick moment has been rewritten. You nod anyway, as if that was the plan all along. Around you, the noise of construction continues. Wood groans under pressure. Dust dances lazily in the light. A donkey tied near the entrance chews something with existential detachment. The foreman yells about a delivery that's late, a tool that's missing, and a man named Lucius who may or may not have fallen asleep in a wheelbarrow again. You keep lifting, stacking, smearing, pretending each movement is as intentional as it is exhausting. Occasionally, you switch arms, then switch back. You wipe your brow with the back of your hand and immediately regret it. Your hand is covered in mortar. Now your face is too. A man beside you notices, but says nothing. In Rome, dignity is often preserved through mutual silence. Hours pass, or perhaps minutes, stretched by monotony. Your arms ache, your back grumbles, and your stomach reminds you that stew is a temporary peace, not a permanent truce. Someone brings around a bucket of water. It tastes of wood and old rope, but it's cool and wet and miraculous. You drink, splash a bit on your face, and momentarily consider quitting. But quitting would mean explaining. And explaining requires breath you no longer possess. So you continue. Another brick, another smear, another moment of ambiguous achievement. Eventually, the foreman grunts in your direction, a sound that could mean anything from good job to stop embarrassing yourself. You choose to interpret it optimistically. He waves you off, pointing toward a shaded corner where laborers retreat to nurse their knees and chew stale bread in companionable groans. You stumble over and collapse onto a wooden crate that protests your arrival with a deep creak. You're now officially resting. The shade is patchy, the air still hot, but at least you're not actively lifting things. You pull out the heel of bread you pocketed 2 mornings ago, give it a quick sniff, and decide it's probably still edible. It's hard, slightly sour, and requires more chewing power than you currently possess, but it keeps your jaw occupied and makes your stomach stop complaining. Around you, other workers lounge similarly, some snoring, some muttering, some staring into the distance, as though pondering philosophy when they're really just calculating how many more bricks until sunset. A man beside you shares a fig. You nod your thanks. It's soft, sweet, and almost refreshing. He doesn't speak, just eats his own, and leans back with the slow elegance of a man who's discovered the perfect way to avoid standing. Across the square, a group of boys chases each other with sticks and ambition. A dog naps under a cart. Someone begins singing off-key and without enthusiasm. You breathe finally. Not deeply, it still smells like dust and effort, but enough to fill your lungs with something other than complaint. The foreman's voice rises again, calling the crew back to the wall. You know you'll have to return. There are more bricks waiting. There are always more bricks, but for now, your hands rest. Your back straightens slightly, and you wonder briefly if perhaps there's a slower job somewhere in the city. Something with less lifting. Something where the hardest part is staying awake. Something like sitting in the corner of a bathhouse, pretending to guard sandals while half listening to senators argue about drainage. The thought of guarding sandals lingers longer than it should. Like a daydream, you can't quite shake. And as the foreman's voice blends with the scrape of trowels and the grumble of unwilling bricks, you begin to calculate the true value of your current position, not in coin, which is minimal, or in prestige, which is non-existent, but in sweat and the number of blisters forming under your tunic. So when the next stack of bricks arrives on a wheelbarrow that's already listing to one side, and the man pushing it lets out a sigh so deep it could be used to measure time, you decide that now might be an excellent moment to take a short, unscheduled detour. You do not announce your departure. You simply walk slowly with the purposeful shuffle of a man who looks like he's been given instructions, and no one stops you because no one ever interrupts a man who looks like he knows where he's going. You veer left, away from the wall, away from the dust, and into a quieter street, one that curves gently toward the familiar columns and soft voices of the neighborhood bathhouse. It's not grand, not one of those marble-laden imperial places with mosaics and echoes and the kind of ceilings that make you feel judged. This one is smaller, humbler, frequented by people who know each other by the sound of their sandals and the way they cough when they laugh. You slip inside through the side entrance, nodding to the man lounging near the door with a broom and a permanent expression of indifference. He does not ask questions. He merely raises an eyebrow, then returns to sweeping dust that immediately returns the moment he moves it. The air inside is warmer, but in a different way than outside, less direct, more enveloping, like stepping into a cloud that smells faintly of old cedar and very new sweat. Your sandals make soft slaps against the damp stone as you enter the apodyterium, the changing room. You sit on a worn bench, not to undress yet, but simply to exist without a brick in your hand or a command in your ear. Around you, men move slowly, methodically, folding tunics, placing wooden clogs neatly beside the wall, and securing their few valuables in niches that pretend to offer privacy. You remove your tunic with the delicacy of someone peeling off damp wallpaper. It clings, then releases with a faint sigh, and you fold it with unnecessary precision, placing it on the bench, as if that will somehow keep it cleaner. It won't. You walk barefoot into the tepidarium, the warm room. The air here is thicker, filled with the kind of heat that doesn't attack, but persuades. It wraps around your limbs, convincing your joints they've earned a reprieve. Your skin, still powdered with construction dust, begins to shine slightly as the heat coaxes out every remaining trace of the day's effort. You sit on a low stone bench, lean back against the damp wall, and close your eyes. Around you, other bathers murmur softly their conversations, hovering somewhere between gossip and philosophy, drifting through the steam like lazy bees. One man complains about grain prices. Another debates the political leanings of a senator whose name you've heard but never cared about. Someone laughs quietly, and the sound bounces off the walls like a warm marble. You stay there longer than necessary. You're not even sure how long, because time in the bathhouse doesn't work the same way. It expands and contracts like lungs. Eventually, someone claps loudly, one of the attendants perhaps, and a few men rise, moving toward the caldarium, the hot room. You follow, not out of ambition, but out of inertia. The caldarium greets you with a wall of heat that makes the construction site feel like a cool breeze. It hits your chest, your face, your knees with equal intensity, and you momentarily wonder if this is what bread feels like 5 minutes into baking. The bench is hotter here, You lower yourself slowly, letting your body argue, then compromise. The sweat comes quickly now, not reluctant, but enthusiastic, pulling every particle of dust from your pores in a farewell performance. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the steam do its work. Your thoughts float upward, drifting with the mist, untethered and soft. Somewhere in the room, a man begins singing, low tuneless, but oddly comforting. You don't recognize the words, and maybe they're not words at all. Just syllables shaped by heat and relaxation. At some point, you rise and shuffle toward the natatio, the cold plunge. It's a small pool sunken into the floor like a secret. The water is still, except for the faint ripple where a previous bather just disappeared beneath the surface with a gasp. You hesitate. You know what's coming. You step in. The cold wraps you like a slap from Neptune himself. Your lungs forget their job. Your heart performs a short aria. And then, just as quickly, your body adjusts. You submerge fully emerging moments later with a shiver that resets your spine. You blink slick with rebirth and sit at the edge, dripping into the drain like a statue after a rainstorm. The bathhouse is quieter now. The crowd has thinned. Most have returned to their errands, their politics, their endless commerce. You remain not quite ready to rejoin the bricks or the fig vendors or the man who juggles amphorae near the forum. You sit in the frigidarium, drying slowly, letting the breeze from the open oculus above play across your shoulders. It smells of sky and stone and someone's forgotten sandals. You know eventually you'll need to retrieve your tunic, your sandals, your name. You'll need to step back outside into the chatter and chaos to decide where to go next, and whether your feet will carry you back to work or toward something altogether different. Like that bakery near the temple, with the bread that smells like toasted hope and mild disappointment. You leave the bathhouse slower than you entered, as if your muscles have melted and are now being held together purely by habit and damp resolve. The sun outside feels brighter than it did before, not because it's grown in intensity, but because your body now scrubbed and steamed and momentarily tricked into relaxation, notices everything again. The air, the smells, the distant clamor of commerce. You blink against the light and start walking without urgency, drawn not by duty or curiosity, but by that small, persistent voice in your stomach, reminding you that fee and bread heel do not constitute a sustainable diet. Your feet carry you toward the temple district, but not for spiritual purposes. You're headed to the bakery tucked behind the temple of Ceres, half hidden by stacked amphorae, and a wagon that's always in the process of being repaired. It's not famous. It's not even particularly clean, but the bread, when fresh, is warm and soft and forgiving, unlike the bricks you fled or the bath sponge you endured. As you approach, the scent reaches you first roasted barley flour smoke, and something sweet underneath, possibly honey, or possibly the baker's beard oil. You turn the corner, and there it is, just as you remember. The little doorway without a proper sign, just a wooden board with a loaf carved into it, and a curtain that always seems to flap the wrong way. Inside, it's cramped and dusty in that charming way that makes you wonder how much flour is in the air and how much has become part of the walls. The baker himself stands behind the counter, arms, folded apron, more white than not hair dusted with the kind of soot that only comes from years of conversations held too close to an oven. He nods at you, already pulling something from the basket. You're a regular enough presence that words aren't necessary, which is fortunate because your mouth is currently preoccupied with staying closed to avoid inhaling a full lungful of airborne crust. He hands you a small loaf, warm and dense, wrapped in a square of cloth that's been reused more times than you'd care to count. You hand over a coin slightly sticky from your earlier plunge, and he doesn't flinch. The transaction is wordless, efficient, comforting. You step back outside with the loaf in hand, tearing a small corner from the edge as you walk. The bread is chewy, mildly salty, with just enough give to make you close your eyes, briefly in appreciation. You take another bite, slower this time, letting it soften against your tongue, the warmth settling into your chest like a polite guest. There's no real destination now, no construction site calling you back, no sponge waiting. Just you, a half-eaten loaf, and a city full of corners you've yet to nod politely at. You wander through the alley, beside the temple where ivy clings to the walls in defiance of civic pruning, and cats sun themselves in narrow beams of light as if they own the entire empire. You find a stone step that hasn't yet been claimed by pigeons or philosophers, and sit bread in one hand, thoughts in the other. Around you, the city flows. Not in a rush, not in a straight line, just flows. A woman passes with a basket of herbs that smells aggressively of fennel. A pair of children argue about the ownership of a stick. A man stumbles by, singing about the sea, though the nearest shore is days away. You eat slowly, not because you're savoring, but because there's no reason not to. Each bite is a gentle reminder that today, so far, has been survivable, not heroic, not remarkable, just tolerably mundane, which in Rome is often as good as it gets. The sun shifts, casting a different kind of shadow over the street, and you know the afternoon is leaning toward late. Somewhere in your bones, the memory of work still hums faintly, like a forgotten obligation, knocking on the back door of your conscience. But no one has come looking for you. No one has called your name, or at least not loudly enough to interrupt the bakery's ambiance. You chew the final bit of crust, brushing crumbs from your lap with the ceremonial air of a man who has completed a meal with neither flair nor failure. A breeze stirs, lifting dust and a few loose fig leaves into a lazy dance before they settle again. The bench grows a little harder beneath you, as stone tends to do when your stomach's full and your mind begins wandering. You stretch your legs out, crack your knuckles, and glance toward the forum. Not for politics, those are best avoided, but because from there you can usually spot something worth noticing. A juggler, a dog fight, a spontaneous speech delivered by someone who shouldn't be speaking. You rise slowly, like bread dough, remembering it's supposed to rise and begin your amble toward the heart of the city. Not too fast, not too focused, just the steady, barefoot-paced drift of a man who's eaten, bathed, avoided labor, and still has a few hours left to decide whether this day will remain as uneventful as he hopes. The crowd thickens as you near the forum. Voices merge. Sandals shuffle. A flute echoes off the colonnades, played with more enthusiasm than skill. You weave between people loaf gone hands, free eyes half-lidded in that particular squint used by those avoiding sunlight, and obligation in equal measure. You pause at the edge of the square where a vendor is selling dice carved from bone, and beside him another hawks good luck charms made of metal that may once have been part of a helmet or a broken hinge. You nod politely. You don't stop. You have no need for luck today. Just silence. Or perhaps something quieter still. The forum opens before you, like a slow yawn, wide and cracked at the corners, sun-baked and humming with low-level purpose. You don't enter dramatically. There's no need. You drift in like the scent of old garlic, a presence that's been around so long it no longer needs explanation. The stones underfoot are uneven but familiar. You know which ones tilt, which ones wobble slightly, and which ones pretend to be flat until your ankle quietly reminds you otherwise. You avoid them all with the instinctive grace of someone who's stubbed their toe here before. The forum is alive, but not in the chaotic, breathless way the bathhouse was. This is a different sort of movement slower, more circular. People talking in small clusters, some arguing, others laughing too hard for something you can't hear. A man in a red-dyed tunic shouts about imported olive oil and its moral benefits, while another man beside him tries to sell roasted chickpeas with a charisma far exceeding the chickpeas themselves. You pass them both not out of disinterest, but because you've already eaten, and your ears aren't in the mood to be persuaded. Near the center, a semicircle of onlookers is forming. You angle toward them with mild curiosity, the kind born from full stomachs and loose schedules. In the middle stands a man with a beard. You could lose a sparrow in gesturing with the kind of exaggerated clarity that tells you he's either teaching or conning. He speaks of stoicism, or perhaps it's just his philosophy on how to not cry when your roof leaks. Either way, he's very certain, and the crowd nods slowly, each at their own pace. You find a spot on the edge near a column that provides more visual support than physical, and lean casually, arms folded, expression neutral. The speaker says something about detachment, and someone behind you lets out a soft, thoughtful that feels too deliberate. The kind of that says, I want you to know I'm pondering deeply. You resist the urge to reply with your own slightly more skeptical You've heard philosophers before, some wise, some wandering, some just looking for a place to say words out loud without being asked to buy bread. This one is animated, pacing in tight circles, like a caged lion who's learned rhetoric. He waves a scroll now and then, but never opens it. It might just be a prop for all anyone knows. His voice rises as he declares something about the nature of freedom, or figs. It's hard to tell, with the echoes, and his tendency to mumble the ends of important sentences. Still you stay, not because the ideas are new, but because the act of standing there half listening feels like something. Like participating in the idea of civic life without actually doing anything. The crowd shifts. A few people leave, a few more join. Children dart between legs, giggling, until a woman calls one sharply, and they scatter like startled pigeons. The philosopher points dramatically to the sky as if it owes him money. You blink slowly, trying to absorb whatever message he's pushing through the rising heat. Something about the soul being like a potter's kiln. Or maybe he said, coin. You're not sure anymore. You step away before the speech turns into a public argument, which it often does when two philosophers overlap like confused weather patterns. You wander past a row of stalls where scribes offer to write your name in perfect Latin for a small fee, and a young boy tries to sell small clay amulets shaped like fish pigs and very confident chickens. You pick up a chicken, feel its weight, consider its absurd little wings, then put it back with a nod that says, "Not today, but maybe someday." The boy shrugs, used to this level of almost interest. You continue your loop around the forum's edge, pausing near the fountain that burbles with the kind of watery sound that always makes you need to pee slightly, even if you just went. The water is clear enough, though you'd never drink it without boiling it, or blessing it, or both. Still, it's nice to stand by. Cool air drifts up from it in uneven little waves, and a dog with impressive eyebrows laps at the edge tail, flicking lazily, like it's swatting away philosophical nonsense. You lean against the edge of the basin and sigh. Not dramatically, just the kind of sigh that happens when the body realizes it's been upright longer than it planned. You watch the sky reflected in the surface of the water. It's not particularly inspiring, but it is sky-shaped and undisturbed by anything except the occasional falling leaf. From somewhere behind you, the juggler from earlier lets out a triumphant shout. You turn your head and see that he's added a fourth amphora to his routine. This one is leaking, and the crowd cheers louder for it. Success in Rome is often measured in precarious spectacle. You stay a while longer, not to applaud, but to enjoy the energy, like basking in second-hand triumph without the pressure of personal achievement. A woman walks by with a basket of dates and offers you one. You accept. It's warm, sticky, and impossibly sweet. She doesn't speak, just walks on, leaving you with sugar on your fingers and a brief sense of good fortune. You lick the syrup away and begin to drift once more, half full of sugar, half empty of urgency. You pass a man repairing a sandal with thread so fine it might be imagination. He doesn't look up. You pass another shouting about theater tickets, and for a moment you consider it an evening sitting still in the shade, watching actors mispronounce myths. But the price he quotes is higher than your dignity can justify. You shake your head and move along, letting the sounds of the forum blend again into their humming lull. Your feet lead you toward the far edge where the shadows grow longer and the street bends quietly away from the chatter. You follow it not with purpose, but with that soft internal tug that says the day isn't quite finished, but it might be winding down into something quieter, something with fewer speeches. And maybe if luck holds a place to sit where nobody's talking about virtue or vinegar or the proper way to fold a toga, the road curves gently away from the forum, like a thought you weren't sure you meant to follow. But now that you're on it, turning back would feel impolite. It's quieter here, not silent. Of course, Rome never truly sleeps or stops or lowers its volume below a persistent murmur, but the voices are fewer, and the sandals that echo along these stones do so with a softer purpose. This part of the city is older, not in age exactly, but in attitude. The buildings lean a little, not in disrepair, but in quiet resignation. Their facades are faded by sun and time, and the paint peels in artistic ways that no one bothers to fix. Vines creep without permission along cracks that no one thought to stop, and shutters hang slightly askew as though shrugging at the wind. You pass a doorway with a worn mosaic of Mercury half missing, but the winged sandals are still clear enough to make you smile. Someone once cared deeply about that doorway. Now it just exists, catching dust and the occasional passing glance from a man like you, with nowhere urgent to be. A potter's shop sits shuttered, its clay wheels silent for the moment, though the scent of damp earth and singed ash still clings to the threshold like a loyal customer. A child crouches nearby, drawing uncertain shapes in the dust with a stick. He doesn't look up as you pass, and you don't interrupt. There's a mutual understanding in these streets, a quiet agreement not to disturb the small rituals that keep the world from tipping. Further along, you come across a man repairing a wooden stool. He doesn't advertise, doesn't shout, just sits in the shade of a cracked awning with a bundle of twine and a look of patient concentration. His fingers move with the kind of confidence that comes from having done the same task for decades. Or perhaps from knowing that no one is in a hurry for results. You nod as you pass, and he returns it with a blink, the closest thing to a greeting you expect here. The street narrows, then becoming more of a corridor than a road, flanked by walls close enough to touch if you spread your arms. You don't, but the thought occurs. Above laundry stretches between buildings, tunics, towels, the occasional mysterious scrap of something that might once have been a cloak, or might just be an ambitious rag. It sways gently in the breeze, like lazy flags from forgotten legions. A cat watches you from a windowsill, its eyes half-lidded, its tail flicking with the rhythm of disinterest. You nod again. The cat does not. A bakery cart is parked along the edge, unattended for the moment, but still warm its baskets, half covered with cloth that does nothing to hide the smell of anise and barely burnt crust. You consider, but the date still lingers on your tongue, and your coin purse still carries the memory of modest loss. So you walk on stomach content, but hopeful feet, guided more by instinct than intention. The sun has begun its descent, not dramatically, but enough to stretch your shadow out ahead of you, like it's scouting for a better resting place. The air is cooler here, touched by shade and the faint promise of evening. You breathe more easily now, the sweat of the earlier day having dried into a crisp salt map along your shoulders and collar. Your body no longer complains. It doesn't celebrate, either just exists with the weary tolerance of a man who's survived one more Roman afternoon. You pass a fountain so small and so chipped that it feels more like a suggestion than a feature, but water still trickles from the lion's mouth, and someone has left a single fig on its edge, half-eaten. Whether it was an offering or a forgotten snack, you don't ask. The smell of oil lamps beginning to light mingles faintly with the city's other aromas: stone olive pits, tired sandals, the distant perfume of something roasted. Evening, it seems, has started its slow creep, and the city shifts to meet it, not with urgency, but with the careful coordination of habit. You find yourself on a street you don't quite recognize. It looks like all the others, but it isn't. There's a curve to it you've never traced, and the doorways here are unfamiliar in their particular weathering. You pause, not out of concern, but out of that quiet moment one experiences when one realizes they are for just a second exactly nowhere in particular. It's a rare feeling in Rome. You let it settle. You lean against a wall that leans back slightly and listen. Not to anything specific, just the city, breathing the way the bricks exhale their stored warmth, the faint scrape of a cartwheel turning a corner somewhere out of sight. A dog barks once half-hearted. A woman laughs, then scolds, and both sounds vanish into the folds of the alley. You stand there for longer than you meant to, not long enough for anyone to notice, but long enough for the sun to shift again, casting your shadow at a new, slightly more theatrical angle. The street ends ahead in a small square, a quiet one, paved in uneven stones and framed by crooked benches and an old fig tree that has clearly outlived several owners. The tree leans slightly, as all wise things do, and under it sits a man with a lyre and a jug of something you can't quite identify from here. He strums lazily, singing to himself, or perhaps to the tree, and you think, just for a moment, that this might be the perfect place to sit for a while, and let the rest of the day finish without you needing to participate in its conclusion. So you step forward, slow and steady, toward the square. The tree, the song, and the gentle promise of a place where nothing much is expected, and where even your shadow can finally sit down beside you, and you reach the square with the cautious optimism of someone approaching a quiet place that might, just might, stay quiet long enough for your bones to forget the day. The tree dominates the space, not because it is particularly large, but because it has been there longer than anything else. Even the cracked stone benches, arranged in a sort of gentle triangle around it. The fig tree's roots push up through the ground in lazy defiance, and the branches sag with the casual confidence of a thing that has nothing left to prove. The man with the lyre doesn't stop strumming when you arrive. He glances up briefly, as if to confirm you're not an official of some kind, then looks back at his instrument with the same affection most people reserve for bread or mild praise. His song has no clear structure. It meanders like a sleepy river, pausing when he forgets the words and continuing with a hum when he remembers he doesn't care. You don't ask to sit. That would be excessive. You simply lower yourself onto the nearest bench with the kind of slow, careful effort that says your knees no longer enjoy surprises. The stone is cooler than expected, shaded by the tree, and perhaps also by some benevolent Roman deity of rest. You exhale, not a sigh exactly, just a long breath that leaves a little lighter than it entered. The man plucks a few more notes, then stops. He sets the lyre down beside him, uncorks the jug with the casual grace of someone who's done this many times before, and takes a sip. He does not wipe the rim before offering it to you, which in Rome is about as friendly as offering someone half your blanket during a sudden hailstorm. You take it without ceremony, lift it, sip. The liquid is warm, slightly sweet, and uncertain in its ingredients. Possibly wine, possibly vinegar in denial, possibly something in between, with ambitions of becoming both. You nod your thanks and hand it back. He grunts approvingly, wipes his mouth on his sleeve, and resumes strumming with no particular aim. A breeze stirs the branches, and a fig drops with a soft plop onto the dirt, where it lies unclaimed and unbothered. The square is still mostly empty, save for the occasional passer-by who glances in, sees nothing requiring their attention, and continues on. That suits you just fine. You lean back, legs stretched, arms folded across your chest, not as a defense, but as a shelf upon which to rest your sense of self. The sounds of the city have dulled here, muted by distance and stone and the thick leaves overhead. You can still hear the world barely. A market crier in the distance, a wheel rattling over cobbles, the flutter of fabric as laundry dances lazily above narrow streets. But all of it feels distant now, like noise from a dream someone else is having. The man plays a new tune, or maybe the same one rearranged. It doesn't matter. You let it wrap around you. Not quite music, more a suggestion of melody, like the idea of a lullaby, whispered by a window, left open too long. A dog pads into the square, small, wiry, with one ear up, and one folded, like it's halfway through a decision. It trots over, sniffs your sandal, with professional curiosity, then circles once and settles at your feet with a resigned little huff. You don't pet it. That would imply ownership or expectation. Instead, you let it exist near you, a warm presence that smells faintly of fish and freedom. The man finishes another verse that trails into nothing, then chuckles to himself as if remembering a joke only the liar would understand. He hums a few notes, and then, without warning or invitation, begins to talk, not loudly, not directly, just into the space between you where words can land without pressure. He speaks of figs, and the time he tried to climb this very tree and was politely discouraged by a passing priest. He tells you about a woman who used to sell boiled eggs from a basket right at the corner there, and how she disappeared one summer without saying goodbye, leaving behind only the faint smell of pepper and a perfectly folded cloth. You don't respond at first, not because you're uninterested, but because the rhythm of his voice feels like an extension of the liar's strings. And interrupting would be like stopping mid-note. Eventually, you nod and say something about boiled eggs, something vague and agreeable. He grins, as if that's exactly the sort of conversation he'd hoped for. The jug makes another pass between you. This time, it tastes slightly more of raisins and old decisions. The dog snores once, then shifts its weight with a grunt. Time here does not behave the way it does elsewhere in the city. It doesn't tick or march or push. It floats. The shadows stretch slowly, lazily, and the air grows cooler in the way that suggests the day is beginning to consider its end. A lantern is lit somewhere behind you, its glow barely visible against the early dusk. The man with the lyre stops playing entirely now. He cradles the instrument in his lap and stares off at nothing in particular, just the horizon made by old rooftops and the first hints of purple in the sky. You feel the weight of the day settle gently onto your shoulders, not burdensome, but firm, like a hand reminding you that even rest has its seasons. Still, you do not rise. Not yet. The bench remains comfortable enough. The square remains undemanding. And somewhere in the distance, you hear laughter, light, familiar, forgettable. The kind of laughter that says someone else in the city is also not quite doing what they're supposed to be doing, and somehow that makes the moment more complete. You glance up at the tree watch. Another fig drop quietly to the ground, and wonder, not urgently, but curiously, where you might go next. Once you decide to move again, once the jug is empty, once the song has faded fully into something else, something less defined than a destination, but more pressing than staying put. The square doesn't ask you to leave, not directly, but as the air begins to carry the faint chill of evening, and the fig tree casts longer shadows than you remember. There's a sense, soft as a yawn, that the time for loitering under leaves and beside lyres has politely expired. The man with the jug yawns too, in a way that seems to release half the day from his ribs, then stretches until his back pops with a sound like cracking parchment. He doesn't speak, just raises the jug in quiet salute and leans back against the tree, letting his eyes close as though he's promised the night he'd meet it there. The dog beside you lifts its head, gives you a look that might be judgment or indigestion, and then stands, shakes with dramatic flair, and wanders off toward the alley without so much as a farewell sniff. You stand too slower, less certain. Your legs feel less like limbs and more like columns that have spent too much time supporting things they didn't ask to. But they obey mostly. You nod once toward the tree, the bench, the man now humming softly with his eyes closed. Then you step back into the little street, guided by memory and the vague sense that your room, your narrow, slightly tilting, gloriously unimpressive room, is waiting for you. Probably full of warm air and the scent of your tunic left too close to the window. The city is different now. Not asleep. Never that, but shifting. The vendors have mostly gone, replaced by lingerers and strollers, the kind who drift like yourself, avoiding purpose without entirely abandoning motion. Lamps flicker in alcoves and over doorways, little globes of amber, holding back the dark with the determination of bees. The stones under your feet are cooler now, and your steps echo a bit more, not loudly, but with a certain soft precision that wasn't there in the daylight. You pass a man lighting a street torch with practiced economy, one hand shielding the flame, the other balancing a bundle of twine and half a loaf of bread. He hums a tune you vaguely recognize, something old and not particularly catchy. You don't speak. You just walk on comforted by the shared silence. As you pass near the baths, now closed, the air still smells faintly of oil and steam, like a memory exhaling. You think briefly of the sponge, Then you think of something else, anything else. A woman leans unturned from a window overhead, shaking out a rug that releases a cloud of dust, and unexpectedly, a spoon. It clatters near your feet, and you pause, look up. She shrugs, mouths something apologetic, and disappears. You leave the spoon where it lands. It has its own journey now. Your feet find familiar paths, turning corners you don't need to think about. The buildings become narrower again, more lived in. You pass the corner where the man sells olives, gone now. But the brine scent lingers like a farewell note. A cat you don't recognize eyes you suspiciously from a barrel, and then blinks in the slow-motion disinterest only cats can master. The stairwell to your insula appears ahead, unchanged in its commitment to disrepair. The plaster still flakes off in strips. The top step still dips slightly. You place your foot there like greeting an old, slightly treacherous friend. The climb is no easier than before, but your body has accepted its fate. You don't rush. Rushing invites gravity to intervene. You pass the second floor where someone is cooking something with far too much vinegar. You pass the third where someone has dropped a cup and is now arguing with it passionately. The fourth floor greets you with the familiar creak, and that one loose tile you always forget until it shifts beneath you like a startled mouse. Your door is slightly ajar, though not in a concerning way. Doors here rarely latch properly, and besides, there's nothing inside worth stealing unless someone's developed a fondness for lumpy straw and a chipped bowl that smells permanently of lentils. You step in, greeted by warmth, not cozy warmth, more the kind of trapped air that tastes like walls and regret, but still, it's yours. The shadows stretch long across the floor, crawling up the far wall where your one window filters in the soft orange of the dying day. You light the oil lamp with a flint and a muttered request to the gods of flame, and they respond barely with a flickering tongue that settles into a weak but willing glow. You sit, not on the bed just yet, because that feels like a commitment, just on the stool by the wall, the one that wobbles unless you sit perfectly still. You place your hands on your knees and look around as if expecting something new. There's nothing. The blanket is still there, folded-ish. The jug still half full of questionable water. A scrap of parchment you meant to write something on still flutters from the shelf where the wind tried to take it, but failed. You let your eyes close for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to hear the room's own small sounds, the tick of the wall, cooling the creak of something settling above you, the faint murmur of someone humming 2 floors down, likely the same tune as the lamplighter. Your stomach makes a curious little noise. Not hunger, exactly. More a protest that you've fed it, dates and questionable wine, and expect it to be satisfied. You open your eyes again and exhale. The room hasn't changed. The night is fully here now, outside that crooked window. And still sleep doesn't come just yet. So you stand once more, stretch until your spine responds with its usual objections, and begin rummaging through the sack in the corner for something: bread, dried fruit, or maybe just the excuse to leave again, to step back out into the streets that are quieter now, but still pulsing with a city that doesn't stop even when it should. And maybe, if your legs agree, you'll wander just a little farther into something mildly purposeful, if only to justify standing up again. Your fingers close around the cloth pouch in the corner, where the crumbs of former snacks have become more memory than meal. And within it, you find what could loosely be described as dinner: a hardened bit of barley loaf, 2 dried plums that now resemble theatrical props, and a single almond, perhaps placed there by fate or a careless neighbor with poor aim. You chew a bit slowly, letting the dryness of the bread persuade your teeth into reluctant movement. The almond is consumed ceremonially, a single crunch that echoes faintly in the small room, like a personal festival of moderation. But it's not enough. Not really. Your stomach sends up a quiet note of protest, and you, not wishing to argue, nod in agreement. The city is still out there. Somewhere, not too far away, is someone selling something warm. Something with oil, or cheese, or honey, or possibly all 3 wrapped in dough, and offered with the kind of expression that says, "This is a little overpriced, but not quite a scam." So you gather yourself, not in a rush, but with the steady rhythm of a man who spent the day doing just enough to feel it in his knees, and you step back into the corridor, closing the door behind you with a familiar click and a soft push that doesn't quite latch as always. The stairwell feels cooler now, touched by night air drifting down from the open rooftop, where someone is surely lounging under a blanket of stars, or failing that under a blanket that used to be part of a curtain. You descend slowly, not out of fatigue, but because descending quickly here would be less walking and more tumbling. The voices of the insula have softened no arguments at the moment, no dropped items or pan flute practice, just the creak of stairs and the sound of your own sandal straps murmuring against skin. At street level, the torch has been relit, burning lower now casting tall, slow-moving shadows that make the alley appear deeper than it is. You walk toward the main lane, guided by the faint scents of cooked lentils, warm pastry, and the vague ambition of roasted goat. The street is quieter, but not deserted. Rome at night breathes differently. The rush is gone, but the activity remains reshaped into pockets of conversation. The clink of wine cups, the shuffle of guards swapping stories, more than vigilance. You pass a group clustered near a tavern, half laughing, half leaning against each other in that loose-limbed way that only fermented beverages can produce. One of them gestures wildly with a skewer of olives, and it's unclear whether he's finishing a joke or starting a duel. You veer left, seeking a vendor. You remember from previous wanderings an older woman who sells fried dough near the northern fountain. Her stall marked not by a sign, but by the constant scent of honey and an apron covered in flour and disapproval. The path there takes you through a square where musicians once played this morning, and now only silence plays back. A cat you saw earlier is now engaged in a slow-motion battle with a beetle. Neither side winning, both deeply committed. You nod as you pass. They ignore you naturally. The woman's stall comes into view as you round the bend, her lamp a weak but determined beacon against the dark. She's there as expected, seated on a stool that squeaks with every breath she takes, frying thin coils of dough in a pan that looks older than most senators. You approach with caution, partly out of respect, partly because stepping too quickly toward hot oil and a stern woman with tongs is unwise in any century. She glances up, without interest, late for supper. She mutters, though not to you exactly, just to the universe. You nod, offer a coin, and she accepts it without enthusiasm, dropping a twist of dough into the oil with the soft hiss of immediate transformation. The smell is divine, warm, slightly spiced, clinging to the air like an affectionate ghost. When it's done, she wraps it in a piece of cloth that used to be something fancier and hands it to you without fanfare. You take it with both hands as if it might slip through your fingers if you're not reverent enough. You thank her quietly, and she nods once, already watching the next customer who hasn't arrived yet. You carry the treat to a low wall across the way, one that serves no real purpose, but makes a fine seat. You unwrap the dough slowly, the way you might unwrap a letter from someone you haven't heard from in years. It's warm, sticky in places, unevenly shaped, and utterly perfect. The first bite is crisp, then soft, the flavor a calming map of the city itself, sweet, oily, simple, and slightly overcooked at one edge. You eat slowly, not out of politeness, but because this is the best thing you've tasted all day, and you want it to last. A man walks by, glances at your snack, then at you, and keeps walking, his expression unreadable. A moment later, he sneezes into his elbow and disappears around the corner. The square is empty again. The moon rises just high enough to make the lantern light seem unnecessary, but no one puts it out. A dog barks somewhere far off. A shutter creaks. A woman laughs behind a curtain you can't see. You finish the last of the dough, licking your fingers with the kind of deliberate care that suggests both appreciation and mild superstition. You wipe your hands on your tunic, knowing it won't matter. The tunic has already committed to being unclean for the foreseeable future. You stretch your back until it answers with a familiar crack and look toward the darker end of the lane. You could return home now. You could. But your feet shift slightly, not toward the stairs, but toward the side path that leads past the sleeping mosaic shop and the shuttered scroll cellar down to where the lamplighter's trail ends in a cluster of small shrines, half lit and fragrant, with the quiet offerings of night owls and uncertain prayers. You take a step in that direction, just one, then another, following the scent of beeswax and wilted laurel, wondering quietly, without rush, what it might feel like to pause again among flickering flames and the company of small flames and modest stone alcoves where prayers gather like dust in corners. No broom dares disturb. Your steps carry you past shuttered homes and quiet walls where ivy curls like sleepy fingers and windows blink shut against the breeze. The side path narrows slightly, curving between two buildings that lean close as though whispering secrets. A torch flickers ahead, its base wedged into a bracket shaped like a lion's mouth, though the lion looks more resigned than regal. The path dips gently here, stone underfoot, damp from the day's leftover humidity, the kind that seeps up rather than down. And as you walk, the air changes. It grows stiller, touched with wax and the faint perfume of herbs, sage perhaps, or rosemary left too long in the sun. And then you're there, stepping into the small shrine courtyard, more an afterthought of the city than a destination, but no less sacred for it. There are 3 shrines, huddled like gossiping sisters against the back wall, each with a niche just large enough for a modest statue or a relief worn smooth by time, and too many hopeful fingers. To your left, the first shrine bears the remains of a once proud bust, Minerva, perhaps though only the hint of her helmet remains, and someone has tucked a sprig of wilted lavender behind her ear, as if to soften the loss. A small bowl of oil sits at her feet, its wick barely flickering, shielded by a chipped glass dome that someone in a rare burst of caution likely scavenged from a broken lantern. The middle shrine is the most popular Jupiter you think, or maybe just a particularly square-jawed ancestor mistaken for a god in the right light. A line of offerings sprawls before him. Stale bread, a single coin, a child's carved rabbit, a twist of linen tied with a ribbon, so faded it could be any color. The third shrine is different. No face, no form, just a smooth, empty alcove stained with ash and mystery. Someone has drawn a circle around its base in chalk recently enough that your foot hesitates before crossing it. You sit on a nearby stone step, more shelf than seat, and listen. There's no music, no chant, no voices raised in praise or argument. Just the occasional hiss of a candle reaching the end of its wick. The creak of wood cooling the subtle movement of the city breathing just beyond the walls. A man enters, gray-cloaked and quiet, carrying a small bundle. He doesn't look at you, just kneels before the middle shrine, places the bundle, bread and rosemary, you think down with practiced reverence, then murmurs something too soft to catch. His hands linger a moment on the edge of the stone, then retreat. He stands and leaves the way he came, his footsteps light, as if unwilling to wake the dust. You remain not out of purpose, but because standing now would feel like interrupting a conversation you're only beginning to understand. You shift slightly, pull your tunic tighter across your chest, and let your gaze wander over the flames. They flicker unevenly, each with its own personality. The one on the left dances restless and bright. The one in the middle steadies itself with the poise of ritual. The one to the right gutters unsure whether to burn or fade, as if uncertain it deserves the fuel. You watch them all with equal patience. A moth flutters close to the leftmost shrine, circles the flame, once then veers away, unimpressed. A cat you didn't notice before emerges from behind the third altar and stretches its yawn so vast it nearly topples its own dignity. It pads over glances at you with the mild disdain of all sacred guardians and settles at the base of the mystery shrine tail, curling around its feet like a question mark left unanswered. You smile, just a little. The cat does not return the gesture. Another visitor arrives, a woman this time older, wrapped in a shawl that has seen better seasons. She carries a cup of milk and a single peeled fig, which she places before the silent shrine, without explanation. She lingers, eyes closed, lips moving in silent rhythm. When she opens her eyes, they pass over you, without alarm. She nods once. You nod back. The fig glistens in the low light, absurdly ripe. It smells faintly of sweetness and endings. You lean forward slightly, not to take it, just to see it more clearly. The fig holds your attention longer than you expect. It's a strange thing to admire, but in this light, in this place, it feels briefly perfect, soft, complete, fleeting. The candles burn lower now, and the wind has shifted again, bringing with it a hint of sea air, or maybe just the memory of it, carried in someone's cloak. The cat stirs, blinks, then resumes. Not caring, you rub your hands together for warmth. Not cold, just habit, and glance toward the sky. Only a sliver is visible, framed by the curve of roofs and the angular stretch of stone. But even that narrow slice holds stars. You recognize none of them, but they flicker with the same inconsistency as the shrine flames, as if communicating in a code neither God nor man has quite deciphered. You could stay longer. Perhaps you will. Or perhaps your legs will carry you again this time, not toward food or comfort, or even aimless wandering, but toward something softer, still a place to lie down maybe, or a rooftop with just enough space for one person and a view of a sky you cannot name but feel you've always known, like a forgotten tune that plays faintly just behind your thoughts. When you finally rise from the low step near the shrine, your knees respond with an audible complaint, but not rebellion. The cat watches you with the silent judgment only cats and statues of gods can pull off convincingly, then closes its eyes as though relieved your presence has ended. You nod toward the offerings, not to any particular deity, but to the effort behind them. Then step quietly out of the courtyard, letting the flickering light fall behind you, like the closing of a soft curtain. The streets are quieter now, not empty, but dimmed. Fewer footsteps, fewer conversations. The city seems to be breathing in, holding that breath in anticipation of sleep or revelation or the next day's arguments. You walk slowly. Instinct, pulling you not toward your room, but upward toward the stairwells and ladders and uneven stones that lead to Rome's most overlooked layer, its rooftops. These aren't the roofs of emperors or temples, but the haphazard, lichen-kissed tops of tenements and shophouses where laundry lines cross like lazy constellations and chimneys lean against each other like tired workers. You know the way, more or less. You've been up there before, chasing breezes, escaping noise, or simply to remind yourself the sky still exists above all this plaster and promise. You duck through a narrow alley, one that smells faintly of onions and lamp oil, and find the wooden crate you once used as a makeshift step. It's still there, though now, partially adopted by a family of spiders who scatter with mild offense when your sandal presses down. You hoist yourself onto the ledge, careful not to use the shutter for balance. It fell once and will likely fall again. Then it's up, hand over hand, to the narrow overhang, then the low awning, then finally onto the flat patch of roof that crowns your building like an afterthought. You stand for a moment, catching your breath, not from exertion, but from the shift in air. Up here, the smells are different. Fewer spices, more dust and tile, and the faint, unreachable sweetness of distant flowering vines. The sounds are muffled too, as though the city is speaking through a curtain. Somewhere a flute plays, but it's hard to tell if it's a person or the wind coaxing a tune from a broken shutter. You cross the roof with the care of someone not entirely trusting the structural integrity beneath them. The tiles shift slightly underfoot, but hold. At the far edge, where a small lip of stone forms a convenient seat, you settle in, wrapping your arms loosely around your knees. From here, the rooftops stretch in every direction, patchwork and beautiful in their disorganization. Some glow faintly from windows below. Others are dark, but not lifeless, holding baskets, jars, forgotten sandals, a single sock pinned by a tile. You let your eyes wander, not searching, just observing. The stars are clearer now. Rome's lights don't blot them completely, not yet. And in this moment, they scatter above you like breadcrumbs left by gods with terrible navigation. You try to name a few. Fail-safe guesses. Jupiter, Mars, something involving a hunter or a plow. But names aren't needed. They just exist, patient, glowing, indifferent. You lean back slightly, feeling the rough chill of stone through your tunic, and close your eyes. The city continues below. You feel it more than hear it now, a thrum, a hum, the background song of pots being scrubbed, lovers whispering someone somewhere, practicing the same line of verse over and over. A breeze stirs the edge of your garment. It brings with it the scent of figs again, or maybe just the memory of that one perfect fig from the shrine still hovering in your mind like a half-told story. You think about your room, not with longing, not with dread, just acknowledgement. It's there, waiting, lumpy straw and all. But here now, the sky feels closer. The walls are farther away. You reach into your pocket and find, to your surprise, the scrap of parchment you'd meant to write on earlier. It's creased, almost useless, but in this light, it looks important. You have no stylus, no ink, just the empty page, and the urge to do something with it. So you fold it. Not neatly, just once into a soft square, and place it on the roof beside you. A note to no one. Or maybe an offering. You don't decide. The wind picks up slightly. Somewhere a door creaks open, then shuts. A laugh bubbles up and fades. You pull your legs closer. Rest your chin on your knees and watch as one of the stars seems to flicker more brightly. Or perhaps blink. Or perhaps it's just your eyes adjusting to a world that has finally quietly decided to slow down. You stay there on the roof, feeling neither tired nor awake, caught in that particular pause that only comes when the day has ended, but the night has not yet begun asking questions. And in that pause, you wonder softly where your feet might carry you next, if you climb down, if you dream, if you follow the sky's quiet invitation toward that strange space between wonder and stillness, where even the rooftops seem to lean closer, listening. You remain where you are for a while, not quite still, but motionless, in the way that leaves sometimes hover before falling. The wind has calmed again, leaving the air soft and unambitious. Above you, the stars no longer flicker, they rest. Below, the city has hushed to a low murmur, like someone speaking through thick cloth, unintelligible, but undeniably there. You shift your weight slightly, stretching one leg, then the other, toes tracing patterns into the dust along the lip of the rooftop. It's fine dust made of years of baked plaster, crushed tile flakes, and whatever the wind decides to forget. You draw a circle with your heel, not for any reason. It's just something to do with time. Then, from somewhere 2 rooftops away, there's a sound, not sharp, not threatening, just out of place enough to wake your ears. A soft clink, like ceramic meeting stone, followed by a sigh, not yours, someone else. Another nocturnal citizen of the roof world. You hesitate, not out of fear, but because you know the rules up here are different. The rooftops aren't public, but they aren't private either. They exist in that liminal Roman category of shared inconvenience. You lean forward slightly, peering between the chimney stacks and sloping shingles until you spot a silhouette. A man, you think, or perhaps a woman with broad shoulders, sitting cross-legged on a lower roof, hunched over something. A bowl, a scroll, possibly both. They don't notice you, or if they do, they pretend not to. You consider saying something, just a word, a greeting, an evening sent out like a pebble into a pond. But the moment passes, and you decide silence is more generous. So instead, you lie back, not flat, just enough to let your spine remember that stone is not a mattress, but will do in a pinch. Your hands fold over your stomach, and your eyes return to the stars. They've rearranged themselves again, or maybe you've shifted just enough that new ones are visible now. One of them blinks in and out, a tiny pulse, like a very patient heartbeat. You name it Marcus. You don't know why. It just seems like the sort of name a quiet star would have. Somewhere in the distance, a chorus of dogs begin a lazy competition, each bark a little slower than the last, as though even their arguments have grown drowsy. A door creaks open far below, followed by the familiar scrape of a chamber pot being emptied into a nearby gutter. You grimace mildly, more out of habit than disgust. The smell will reach this height eventually, but not tonight. The air is too kind. Another breeze passes this one, cool enough to make you pull your tunic tighter around your shoulders. You briefly consider returning inside to your room, your cot, your now lukewarm corner of existence. But the thought drifts as quickly as it arrives. This moment, this gentle expanse of tiled horizons and winking sky feels borrowed from a quieter world. You're not ready to give it back. The figure on the other roof stands now stretching arms raised, like a statue reawakening. You watch quietly, and then they step down, disappearing into the hatch of a neighboring building, leaving you alone again, with the city's breath and your own. You hum not a tune exactly, just a few wandering notes that might have once belonged to a song. It drifts upward, caught by nothing, answered by no one. But still, it feels worthwhile. A pigeon coos from a hidden nook above your head. You glance up, half expecting it to drop something unfortunate, but it merely stares, blinking once with the indifference of a fellow tenant. You nod. It does not return the gesture. Far below, a pair of sandals slap against stone, hurried but not panicked. A late errand, a forgotten promise. You imagine their story briefly. Perhaps they overslept, or perhaps they're delivering figs to a lover with more hunger than patience. You smile at the thought and close your eyes again. Not to sleep, just to rest them. Behind your eyelids, the stars become shapes, then stories, then nothing at all. Time thins. You drift without moving. Your breath slows. And then, as if called by your stillness, a sound emerges, a faint rustle, close now, from the rooftop behind you. You open your eyes slowly, expecting the pigeon, the wind a piece of laundry, come unmoored. But instead, you see a figure standing at the opposite edge of the roof. Not menacing, not curious. Just there, holding a small lantern, its glow soft and uncertain. They don't move toward you. Don't speak. They simply set the lantern down, its wick fluttering slightly in the night breeze, and then step back into the dark, gone again. The lantern remains, a gentle point of amber on the rooftop's edge. You sit up slowly, feeling the weight of your own limbs more than ever. You consider the lantern. It wasn't meant for you. Or maybe it was. Either way, it's there now, part of your night, part of this long, slow drift between waking and sleep. You rise, knees grumbling again, and cross toward it. The light wobbles, catching your shadow and stretching it long across the tiles. You kneel, not in reverence, but to look. Inside the lantern is nothing unusual, just a candle stub, a bit of soot, a loop of old twine that must have served as a makeshift handle. But it glows, softly, steadily, like something waiting to be noticed. You pick it up carefully, its warmth seeping into your palm like a memory. The rooftop feels different now, not louder, not brighter, just more alive. You turn facing the distant hills, and there, in the far blackness, a new star appears, perhaps real, perhaps reflection, and suddenly your legs begin to move again, slow but deliberate toward the far corner of the roof, past the fig-stained tiles, and the dust toward the place where chimney shadows give way to a slope so shallow it almost dares you to trust it. You move carefully, lantern in hand, each step a small negotiation with gravity and tile. The roof dips here, then rises again, forming a narrow ridge that runs between two chimneys like a forgotten spine. The lantern's light flickers with every shift in your grip, casting elongated shadows that stretch across the uneven clay in strange, uncertain angles. Behind you, your own footprint trail is barely visible in the light dust, a map of meandering thoughts and mild decisions. Ahead, the rooftops stretch like a lopsided quilt stitched together by generations of builders who never spoke to each other, but somehow shared the same belief that everything should lean just a little. You pause at the top of the ridge and look out. The city from this height seems quieter than ever. The domes and towers are softer now, edged in moonlight instead of marble. You can see the dark patchwork of the forum, the faint glow of scattered torches lining streets that only half remember their own names. Somewhere, someone is singing the tune, barely audible, as though it's being hummed to a child, or maybe to a wall. You listen, but the lyrics never arrive, just melody, gentle and slow. The wind picks up again, not strong, but curious. It plays with the hem of your tunic, curls around your ankles, nudges the flame within your lantern. You shield it with your hand, and for a moment, the warmth of it presses into your palm like the breath of something old and kind. The ridge leads you to a broader, flat rooftop, this one layered with old boards and faded cloth. It's familiar. A rooftop used by neighbors for drying herbs, storing things that didn't fit inside, or sometimes simply for escaping the heat on stifling nights. A small crate sits at the far edge, half covered in a folded tapestry that no longer matches anything. You make your way over and sit once more, lantern resting beside you. Its glow joining the moonlight like an old friend. The crate creaks faintly beneath your weight, but doesn't complain. You lean back against the chimney's rough stone legs stretched out before you, arms resting on your knees. Above, the stars blink in their slow rhythm, and below the rooftops hum with sleep. It feels like you've climbed to the very edge of the city's breath, and it's paused here, waiting to see if you'll speak first. You don't. You just breathe. The lantern pops softly, a thread of wax, catching fire in a quiet dance. You glance at it, watch the flame steady itself, and then turn your gaze outward again. A moth flutters, near orbiting you once, like a moon, then disappears toward the chimney. You feel a strange sense of camaraderie. You're both just passing through. From your perch, the roof continues beyond the chimney, narrowing into another passage of tile and wood. You didn't notice it before. It's less of a path and more of a suggestion. A few boards laid end to end, like someone once tried to bridge one roof to another and got distracted halfway through. You consider it. Your legs, for their part, remain neutral. The lantern, still glowing faithfully, feels heavier now, but in the comforting way a well-worn blanket does. You rise slower than before, careful not to let the crate tip. A soft crack suggests one of its legs is giving up on ambition. You step onto the first board, which rocks but holds, then the next. The view shifts again. New angles, different rooftops, unfamiliar chimneys shaped like crooked hats. You pass a small potted plant someone left out long ago. The soil is dry, the leaves brittle, but a single bud clings stubbornly to the tip. You nod at it. It nods back, or maybe the wind does it a favor. The boards end at a sloped section of roof, one more climb before whatever lies on the other side. You place the lantern down, nestle it into a dip between tiles, and begin your ascent. Hands and feet working together. Body low breath, steady. The city sounds fall away with every step until all that's left is your heartbeat and the tiny scrapes of movement. At the peak, you stop, not because you're tired, but because the view demands it. Before you stretches a rooftop garden, not grand, not planned, just a collection of clay pots, cracked bowls, and broken crates, all sprouting something. Mint, perhaps. Parsley. A vine with no name curling around a bent shutter, propped up like a forgotten gate. There's no sign of the gardener, just the work itself. Quiet, modest, persistent. You step carefully between the pots, the lantern light casting thin lines across their surfaces. One holds a sleeping lizard, its tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm so slow it might be part of the stone. Another houses a cluster of bees, dormant for the night, nestled inside the broken base of a pitcher that once likely poured more wine than water. You settle onto a low stool, half hidden by ivy. It fits you perfectly. The lantern rests beside your foot now, its glow mingling with the silver light of the moon. Together, they light the garden, not in brilliance, but in suggestion, revealing just enough to know there's more. You inhale. The scent is a mix of soil, old clay, faint herbs, and something else, something sweet and hard to name. Perhaps it's the vine. Perhaps it's just the air remembering summer. A breeze stirs again, stronger this time, lifting a piece of parchment that had been tinned under a small bowl. It flutters once, then lands at your feet. You pick it up. It's blank, except for a single line scrawled near the bottom, in a hand that wasn't in a hurry. Still here. You don't smile. Not exactly. But something in your chest relaxes like a string being gently unwound. You fold the paper, place it in your pocket beside the other, and sit quietly, eyes closed, letting the garden wrap around you. The rooftops hush beneath you, and the stars peer down to see where you might go once you rise, once the lantern dims, once the next path opens quietly into a corner of the rooftop you hadn't noticed before, mostly because it didn't seem like a place meant to be noticed. The garden fades there, not abruptly, but gradually, pots thinning out herbs, giving way to moss and quiet stone. The ivy that once clung confidently now trails loosely, like it forgot where it was going. You rise from the stool slowly, careful not to disturb the lizard, still curled like a comma on the edge of a cracked bowl. The lantern's light wavers a little now, its wax puddling at the base, its flame lower, gentler, as though it's listening more than illuminating. You pick it up and walk softly to the edge where the stone parapet crumbles just slightly, and beyond it, another rooftop hovers just out of reach. Between the two, there is something. A plank, maybe, or several pieces of tile laid with vague ambition, and a rope that's more wish than structure. You hesitate, of course. Anyone would. But the hesitation isn't fear. It's more like the moment before stepping into a cold bath. You know you'll move forward eventually, but you owe the moment a little patience. So you pause, lantern held low, and test the first board with your foot. It creaks predictably, but does not give. The rope, which looks as though it once held laundry more than lives, lies slack along the side, frayed in places, but still pretending to help. You take the next step, and the next. The rooftops are not far apart, but the gap feels wider when you're halfway across the city, pressing in from below, above all sides. A breeze sneaks past your ankles. You don't look down, not out of fear, just manners. The final step lands you on a smaller roof, newer than the last, with tiles less weary, their surfaces smoother, but fewer signs of life. No pots, no plants. Just a square hatch shut tight, and beside it, an empty wine jug with a cork stuffed halfway in. You set the lantern down next to it and crouch. The hatch doesn't look locked, just heavy. You consider knocking, but that seems too formal for rooftops. Instead, you place your palm flat on the wood and wait. Nothing stirs. No light. No voices. Just the quiet thrum of Rome sleeping, and the stars continuing their slow rearrangement above. You sit beside the hatch, cross-legged, letting your body settle again. The tile here is still warm from the day, clinging to the memory of sunlight like an old song. You lean back against the chimney stack behind you, its brickwork rough but dependable. The wine jug lets out a soft groan as the cork shifts, and you watch as a moth flutters by, dances once around the lantern's failing glow, then disappears over the edge. Time moves strangely again. Not fast, not slow, just sideways. The kind of time that exists when you're not waiting, not leaving, just being. You reach into your pocket and feel the parchment there, the one that said, "Still here." You don't take it out. You just acknowledge its presence, like an old friend dozing in the same room. The lantern's light dips again. The flame falters, catches, then settles. You lie back slowly, letting your head rest on your arms, gaze angled toward a section of sky between two chimneys. There's a new star there, or maybe one you hadn't noticed. It pulses faintly like a slow breath. You imagine a world where that star has watched this city rise from a field of huts, has seen every brick laid, every pot broken, every fig tree planted and forgotten. You wonder how many rooftop wanderers it has blinked at in silence. You close your eyes just for a moment and let the sound of your own breathing blend with the hush of the city. Behind your eyelids, you see the rooftops again, mapped in soft, golden lines, glowing not with lanterns, but memory. The gardens, the planks, the stray notes of music, the fig that glistened like a secret, and above it all, the sky vexed and slow, and gently uncaring. A rustle breaks the thought, a small sound not loud, not near. Your eyes open. The hatch beside you has shifted, not open, not fully, but ajar by the width of a fig stem. Light slips through faint amber, steady. You turn your head slightly. The wine jug is gone. You sit up slowly, unsure if you dreamed the jug, the moth, the entire last hour. But the lantern is still there, its light nearly gone flickering in that particular way flames do when they're saying goodbye without fuss. You touch the hatch gently, push it open an inch more. The light within doesn't grow brighter, just more certain. There's a smell, too. Not food, not smoke, something like parchment and dust, the scent of places forgotten, but not abandoned. You lean closer, peering into the gap. Stone steps descend into the space below, curved slightly, as though unwilling to commit to straight lines. You can't see the bottom, just the spiral and the glow. A draft brushes your face, cool, but not cold, inviting in its own indifferent way. You pick up the lantern, its handle warm the flame, low but alive, and step toward the opening. One foot meets stone, then the next. The hatch creaks softly as you begin your descent, and the night above continues, unchanged, the rooftops still stretching like dreams not yet remembered, the stars blinking once more, as if amused, or simply passing time, waiting to see what you might find beneath. Those curving stone steps that spiral inward, like a seashell carved from old silence. Your sandals land softly with each step, the sound muffled by the dust that has settled like a second skin over everything. The lantern's flame dims further, not in fear, but in sympathy, small light for a space that asks only quiet. The staircase narrows, curls, then widens again, without warning, as though the builders couldn't quite decide how much space a person might need to change their mind. The walls are not smooth. They bear the marks of trowels, long retired fingerprints from hands that pressed plaster and never came back to check it. You trail your fingers along the surface once just lightly, and the dust rises in small, slow clouds, drifting like sleep across your knuckles. After what might be 10 steps or 100 time doesn't track well in spirals, you reach the bottom. The space opens into a room that isn't quite a cellar, but not quite anything else either. Its ceiling is low in places and too high in others. The floor is uneven, sloped ever so slightly, as if the entire space were tilting gently toward one thought. Your lantern flickers again, and you raise it higher. The light falls upon shelves, dozens of them, some straight, others bowed, all heavy with objects that seem more forgotten than stored. Clay pots with no lids, scrolls too tightly wound to open without apology. A bust with no nose and too many eyebrows. It's not a hoard exactly, more like a collection left behind by someone who thought they might return. You move slowly among the shelves, your steps careful, reverent. A jar labeled in faded ink contains nothing but dried fig seeds. A wooden box, its latch broken, holds a single sandal, and a marble that might once have been a bead. You pause at a low table near the back, upon which rests an open book. Not a scroll, not a codex, something in between. Its pages are thick frayed at the edges, and blank, save for a single line written across the center of one. If you are here, you already know. You don't know what it means, but your shoulders drop slightly, as if the room has exhaled with you. Behind the table, there is a tapestry. It hangs crooked, attached at 3 corners, the 4th left to sag, as if undecided. The fabric depicts no scene you can name, swirls of color, soft lines that suggest wind or water or time itself unraveling. You touch it gently, and it sways. Behind it, a narrow door, wooden, unadorned, half covered in dust, but clearly used recently. There are prints, faint but fresh, in the floor just before it. You set the lantern on the table, its light catching the edge of a small bronze bowl filled with sand. The flame casts long shadows across the ceiling, now turning the room into a soft chamber of shifting shapes. You open the door slowly, careful not to disturb whatever lives behind it. The hinges groan in protest, or perhaps they're singing. The room beyond is smaller, warmer. A single window shuttered from the outside lets in the idea of moonlight. A bedroll lies in one corner, neat but used. A pair of sandals placed beside it, aligned with absurd precision. A cup, half filled with what looks like water, sits beside a folded cloth on a low stool. Someone lives here, or lived here recently. You step in and sit beside the stool, the cloth catching your eye. It's patterned, not ornately, just simply lines and dots like stars drawn by someone with steady hands and no rush. The cup is cool to the touch. You don't drink, but you acknowledge its presence. It feels like something that has waited. Across from the bedroll, another shelf. This one holds only one item. A box no larger than a loaf of bread carved from dark wood, with hinges made of some greened metal. It's closed, but not locked. Your fingers rest on the edge. The lid is smooth, warm. You open it. Inside a set of tiny vials, each sealed with wax. And beneath them, a small folded note that reads, "For the waking, not the sleeping." You don't touch the vials. You close the lid, gently replace it on the shelf, and lean back against the wall. The air here doesn't move much. It's thick, with quiet, and decisions that haven't been made. The lantern in the other room pops softly, its flame still holding on. Your eyes adjust further, and you begin to see what this room really is, not hidden, not secret, just forgotten with care. A place to pause, a place to hold what didn't fit anywhere else. You sit in silence, unsure whether you are the visitor or the visited. The walls feel close but not heavy. The air tastes faintly of time and dust. Somewhere above, faintly, a pigeon calls. Once then falls quiet. You wonder who lived here, or who still might, and whether they will return through the same hatch you came, or another you haven't yet found. You stay where you are. Lantern glow, reaching through the door. Shadows stretching thin, like old parchment, while your hand rests gently on your knee. And you wait without urgency to decide whether the next breath will lead you back up or deeper still into another quiet, held so carefully you almost hesitate to break it. But something about the stillness in the small chamber, the bedroll too recently straightened the sandals, too precisely, aligned the untouched water, whispering in the cup, invites motion. Not restlessness, just motion. as if the room, though hospitable, is not meant to be lingered in for long. You rise slowly, leaving the box on the shelf, its vials undisturbed, and step softly back through the narrow door into the larger space where the lantern, now low and calm, still offers its silent companionship. The shadows have grown bold with its waning light, stretching further, curling along the uneven edges of shelves and jars, making the strange collection of objects seem more theatrical than archaeological. You walk among them again, but this time with different eyes. The broken sandal beside the marble seems less like a forgotten item and more like a clue. The dried fig seeds in the labeled jar, more deliberate than you'd first assumed. A thread connects them, but it doesn't tug hard. It just hums quietly beneath your thoughts. You pass by the open book once more, the one with the single line across the middle. If you are here, you already know. You still don't. Not quite. But something inside your chest hums faintly in answer. At the far wall, nearly hidden behind a sagging shelf of empty amphorae, you spot it, a seam in the stone floor. Not a crack. A seam. Straight, narrow, purposeful. You tilt the lantern low and kneel beside it, brushing away the dust that coats everything down here like a second breath. The seam outlines a hatch, small and square. There's no handle, just a slight indentation where fingers might find purchase. You hesitate, of course. All decent people do before opening hatches they didn't install. But your fingers move anyway, pressing gently, then lifting. It groans softly wood against stone and rises with the reluctant grace of something not opened often, but kept oiled just in case. Below, more steps. Narrower. Steeper. Cut not from stone, but from packed earth. You retrieve the lantern now, barely a flicker, and begin to descend one careful step after another. The air changes. Not colder, but denser. The walls are dirt reinforced with wooden beams that creak ever so slightly with each breath of the earth above. After several turns, the steps level into a tunnel. You follow it. There's no decision to be made. It simply exists, and so you walk. The tunnel isn't dark. Not entirely. From somewhere ahead, a soft blue glow pulses faintly, as though the air itself has remembered how to shine. Your lantern, sensing its cue, gutters one final time and fades. You carry it anyway. Its weight in your hand feels familiar now, like an old coin or a song you've half forgotten, but hum anyway. The glow grows stronger as the tunnel curves, not brightening exactly, but becoming clearer, more present. it feels like moonlight without a moon. You turn the final corner and stop. The tunnel opens into a chamber, wide domed, supported by thick columns that rise like tree trunks from the floor. The walls are lined with alcoves, each containing a single object, a bowl, a scroll, a feather, a cup, a stone. No labels, no pattern, just offerings, perhaps, or memories placed down gently and left to rest. The blue light comes not from a fire, but from the air itself, swirling gently around the columns, dancing like dust caught in sunbeams. It is neither warm nor cold. It simply is. In the center of the room is a circle of smooth stone, its surface worn flat by what must be generations of footfalls. You step into it, not thinking, just following. The moment you do, the hum returns low, steady, like the sound of wind beneath a door. Not loud, just present, as if the room has acknowledged your arrival. You turn slowly, taking in every alcove, every shape. And then you see it. One alcove, slightly lower than the others, holds a small clay tablet. You step toward it, drawn not by curiosity, but something gentler. The tablet bears no script, just an imprint, 5 fingers pressed gently, deliberately into the soft clay long ago. A hand. Yours? No. But familiar somehow. You lift your own hand, hesitating, not to match it, not yet, just to feel the air above it. It is still warm, not the warmth of fire, the warmth of memory. You lower your hand again and step back. You are not meant to place your print there. Not yet. Perhaps never. But it matters that you've seen it. Behind you, one of the columns shifts slightly, not dramatically, just enough to draw your attention. You walk over. At its base, a set of carvings, faint, worn, shapes, not letters. You trace them with your fingers and feel them vibrate softly. The same hum as before, a different note. You close your eyes and let your palm rest there a little longer. The column doesn't speak, but something inside your chest begins to loosen, like a knot made long ago, starting at last to fray. You sit at the base of the column, not to rest, just to be. The blue light circles lazily, curling around your knees, your shoulders, your thoughts. You don't know how long you stay. The chamber has no clocks, no sun, no urgency, only space. And in that space, you wait. not for someone, not for something, just for the next moment to arrive when your hand might lift again, your feet might find another path, your breath might stir the air and draw you forward into a shift so subtle you're not sure at first whether it happened outside of you or within. But something nudges like a breath on the nape of your neck, or the way water tugs at your ankles before retreating. You rise again without thinking. Your knees oblige without drama. Your hands brush off dust that hasn't quite settled, and the tablet with its ghostly handprint watches you as you turn, as if it knew you'd only stay as long as the hush asked you to. The chamber behind you doesn't vanish. It simply allows you to leave. Your footsteps make no sound as you cross the floor. The soft blue glow thins behind you, stretching like gauze, growing more faint with each step until it finally gives in to darkness. Before you is a corridor, narrow-arched, lined with stones, so old they've forgotten what smooth felt like. You run a hand lightly across the wall. It feels warm, not from sunlight, but from the breath of time. And as you walk, the air begins to change. Sound begins to return gently. First, the echo of your own footsteps, then the occasional drip of water, landing somewhere unseen. Then, something stranger, a sound not quite music, but not quite silence either. Like humming, made by a building that dreamed and never quite stopped. You pass a niche in the wall, and then another. Small alcoves, filled with objects, again, more fragments than artifacts. A broken cup, a coin bent at an impossible angle, a sandal strap, a torn strip of linen with a single knot in it. Nothing labeled, nothing explained. You do not stop to inspect them. You understand now that these things are not here to be known, only noticed. The corridor twists, never dramatically, just enough that you can't quite see the end. You find comfort in that. Straight lines feel like declarations. This path is more of a question. You reach a fork, one side sloping upward, the other curling gently down. Both are dimly lit, but the light feels different. Upward glows golden dry, inviting. Downward shimmers, silver, damp, secretive. You listen not for a sign, but for the shape of your own footsteps on the stone. And they tell you softly that your journey hasn't sunk yet deep enough. So you descend. The passage narrows slightly, the air heavier, now touched with minerals and memory. Somewhere far above, the world continues a chamber pot, scraped a fig, sliced a man, muttering about the price of fish. But down here, all that evaporates. The corridor breathes only the past. You pass another door half open, revealing a room filled with scrolls arranged in no order you can name. They seem to breathe too curled, like sleeping cats in their alcoves. You do not enter. You bow your head slightly, a nod to whatever archivist once lived in this dust, and continue. A few steps later, another chamber opens, a circular one filled with shallow basins carved directly into the floor, each holding water that reflects nothing at all. You kneel beside one. It should reflect the ceiling. Your face, the flicker of your lantern, now barely a whisper, but instead it offers only darkness, calm, and bottomless. You dip your finger in. The water is cool and does not ripple. You withdraw your hand and leave it be. These pools are not for washing or wishing. They are for remembering something you do not yet remember. The corridor resumes. You notice the walls now pulse slightly, like a slow breath. Probably the light, probably your imagination. The path tilts again, and you follow without questioning. A small archway appears framed by two stones with carvings worn almost smooth. You duck through. Beyond it, a long hall filled with what appear to be columns, each carved with symbols, but no two the same. They are massed evenly, yet none align. You walk among them like a guest in a room that's not quite abandoned, not quite expecting you. And as you move, the sound changes again. Not music, not speech. Something more like recollection, a woman's laugh echoing faintly from no source. A child humming a lullaby from generations ago. The creak of leather, the clink of pottery, the sigh of someone sitting down after standing too long. The air is thick with stories that refuse to become sentences. You stop at one of the columns. It hums slightly different than the rest. You touch its surface. It's warmer than the others, and faintly damp, as if someone had pressed their forehead there not long ago. Your fingers trace the grooves, deep, spiraled, impossible to read, but comforting to touch. Something moves beyond the farthest pillar. Not a person. A shadow, not cast, just present. Watching, maybe. Passing through, also maybe. You don't follow. You simply continue toward the back of the room, where the columns grow thinner, like the notes of a song nearing its final breath. There, carved into the wall, is a frame, but empty. Not missing something, just not ready to hold it. You pause there, resting one hand on the edge. The stone is cold, but not unfriendly. You wonder if you're meant to leave something. A word. A piece of your tunic. The note still folded in your pocket. You reach for it, unfold it slowly. Still here, it reads. You place it gently into the frame. The paper lies flat, curling slightly at one corner. The wall does not react, nor should it. You step back. Behind you, the shadows shift again, and a breeze faint, scented with thyme and old parchment, slips past your shoulder and through the hall toward the next space where the light changes once more, and you follow it without looking back toward the passage that curves not forward or back, but inward, as though space has decided to fold itself just slightly for your benefit. You step through the place where the light, that uncertain shimmer, threading like silver, breath through the air, parts just enough to let you pass. It feels like slipping through a sigh. The corridor narrows again, its walls closer now, not in a way that presses, but in the way two hands cradle. You move carefully, your shoulder brushing against stone that bears no markings, no ornaments, just the faint warmth of touch. Places where others, perhaps like you, or nothing like you, once walked with the same patient confusion. The floor tilts downward, shallow and smooth, carved more by use than intention. You realize your feet no longer echo. They move without notice, and the sound of your movement belongs to the place now absorbed, welcomed. Around the next bend, because there is always another bend, you find a wall not of stone but of woven reeds, so ancient the fibers shine like bone. They're dry but not brittle, sturdy in the way old baskets survive by simply never giving up. There's no door, only a part in the weave, an opening just wide enough for you to step through if you wish. You pause as you've learned to, not out of hesitation, but respect. Then you step through. The chamber beyond is neither large nor small. It simply is. Round, low-ceilinged, domed, like the inside of a kettle left on the coals too long. In its center stands a pedestal flat, unadorned, made from the same stone as the walls. Around it, 12 cushions, placed at even intervals, though none are quite the same color. Faded reds, washed-out greens, one that might have been blue if someone had asked politely. You move toward the pedestal and notice the object atop it, a simple bowl. Clay hand-thrown, slightly lopsided. Inside, water again, still dark calm. But this time, it reflects. Not the ceiling, not the room, but your face. Clearer than it should. Clearer than water usually allows. And behind your face, another. Not menacing, not familiar, just present. You blink, and the reflection changes. Your face again. Then just water. You sit on the nearest cushion. It sighs slightly under your weight, as though it remembers this part of the story. The room holds its breath with you. Around the pedestal, faint carvings circle the base. Not words, not pictures, just lines and curves that suggest movement. They look like sound might if it settled into clay. From the edges of the room, a sound begins. A hum. Low. Familiar, in the way a melody becomes part of your bones. You're not alone, though you do not turn. You know in the way quiet knows when to hush further, that others have entered. You do not need to see them. You feel the warmth of their presence, like you feel sunlight through heavy cloth. One sits beside you. Another settles across. No greetings, just breath, just the gentle shuffle of garments. The hum grows not in volume, but in depth. It doesn't fill the room. It wraps around it. The water in the bowl stirs, not rippling, just shifting slightly, like a memory surfacing. You watch, not expecting, just allowing. The lines at the base of the pedestal seem to shimmer now faintly. You don't move. The hum pauses, not ends, pauses. And in that breath, a voice not loud, not sharp, not even distinct, emerges like a footnote whispered after centuries of margin dwelling. It says one word, not your name, something older. You understand it, but you could never say it again. It is not a word of instruction. It is not a call. It is simply acknowledgement. You are here. You have always been here, even when you were not. The voice does not return. The silence it leaves behind is not empty. It is full, just soft. The others rise, one by one, not hurried, not in procession, simply continuing. You remain for a moment longer. You look into the bowl. Your reflection watches you back. You nod. It nods too. You stand. The cushion releases you, like a breath you didn't know you'd held. You step away from the pedestal, not toward a door. There isn't one, but toward an opening in the far curve of the room, where the wall seems thinner. You pass through it into a corridor more narrow than before, the stone smoother, more deliberate. The light here is golden again, tinged with the soft pink of a sun you cannot see. The air feels warmer, not stuffy, not stale, just lived in. It smells faintly of parchment and time again. You know this scent now. It means something waits. The corridor slopes upward. Your legs welcome the change. Your hands brush the wall again. You recognize the feeling beneath your palm, the same grain as the staircase above the hidden hatch, the same rhythm of stone as the first chamber where blue light danced without flame. You are returning. Not backward, not home, just returning. You climb slowly. The air grows lighter. Your breath does too. Ahead, faint daylight flickers, not strong, not sharp. The kind of light that happens just before dawn. You reach a threshold, not a door, not a gate, just an archway where the stone gives way to wood again. And beyond it, a stairwell, curving upward, dustless, expectant. You climb again. Your fingers curl around the familiar edge of the lantern, now cool, its wick spent, but its shell steady in your grip. You step upward, each footfall, gentle, each breath wrapped in the warmth of something that has remembered you. And then, just before the stair ends, just as the light turns the color of new parchment, you hear a voice, not outside you, but within the kind that doesn't start with sound. And it asks nothing. It only waits, smiling slightly, to see what you might do once you step into